on whether the U.S. will get directly involved, joining in Israel strikes. Let's bring in a political panel on this of Wright, the NewsNation political contributor, scholar and lecturer at Princeton, and Chris Hahn, the Democratic strategist, NewsNation political contributor. They both join us now. Lauren, you want to start us out on this? Not the first time this president and his intelligence community have been at odds, going back to his first administration and this, but, you know, this is high stakes in terms of the decision that he's going to make on military action. What would you say about his own assessment of the intelligence he's getting?
It couldn't be higher stakes. And, you know, watching the flippant nature of these comments, you know, paired with the gravity of the situation, I think is disconcerting no matter which side of the aisle you're on. But this is something different about Trump, where he really does differ from former presidents. He makes decisions seemingly on the fly. Maybe Tulsi Gabbard won't be around for very long, but it actually seems that in this Iran-Israel situation, he doesn't want to get dragged into the war. However, he does seem very angry that Iran did not take advantage of his opportunity to compromise with the United States.
What do you think, Chris?
I mean, if this is what it takes to get rid of Tulsi Gabbard, I'm all for it. I don't think she was qualified for the job.
I think she might be on her way out, Chris.
That the president of the United I think it's odd that the president of the United States is making a decision like this and ignoring his DNI and not really bringing in his Secretary of Defense. It speaks to their qualifications, and the president picked two people who are relatively good on television as opposed to people who were good for the job. And he is now relying on people who are careerists in those fields, which I think is actually a good thing. And perhaps he should be looking for somebody more qualified to fill those two positions, so he has a trusted member of his cabinet in those roles. So I do think it's odd, and I agree with Lauren, the flippant nature of these comments should be alarming to a lot of Americans and alarming to people in Israel and in Iran. Look, I hope to God we don't put a single soldier in Iran, because if we do, they're going to be there for decades. And that's not what America wants. That's surely not what Donald Trump wanted when he ran for office. Is one of the things I agreed with him fully on. So I hope he doesn't turn back on that.
One of the personal issues aside, though, of Tulsi Gabbard or of Pete Hegseth, qualifications and all the rest, there was a very, very highly qualified person in the previous administration, the late Colin Powell, who went to the UN with faulty intelligence ahead of the Iraq War, Lauren. So, I mean, this is a subject that a lot of people look at and say, wait a minute, what is the intelligence that we actually have? What is really going on? Especially, I think, when they hear the president couch it that way. So we'd like to know before we commit, wouldn't we, about what the actual assessment is?
Yes, and public opinion, in some ways, Americans have very short memories, but the Iraq War is not one of those issues. They still remember how expensive in terms of lives lost and dollars those wars were to Americans, which meant we could do less for people here at home in some cases. However, Trump does need to make the case more clearly, if the U.S. is involved in any way, shape, or form in this conflict, why Iran is actually a threat to the United States. They've promised, they've threatened our biggest ally as well as us. And so the jump Americans have not yet made in terms of public opinion is what this conflict means in terms of the U.S., and there's a major case to be made there. You know,
I thought the president, and this is going to overshadow it to some degree, made news on another important subject at that tarmac Q&A with reporters, and that's immigration. There's been all this back and forth, Chris, about the the directive of, who's getting raided on certain days, workplaces, farms, and the like. And he kind of previewed what it sounded to me like was going to be a new policy when it comes to farmers. Take a listen to part of that.
Never going to do anything to hurt our farmers. And you could also say the leisure business, etc. There are some businesses where you have a disproportionate amount of people that are the people that you're talking about. At the same time, we have to get the criminals out of our country. And we're looking at doing something where, in the case of good, reputable farmers, they can take responsibility for the people that they hire.
What do you make of that, and what do you think he meant by that, that farmers then could take responsibility for the people that they would hire? Chris?
I mean, you know, that's just a real weird statement. I mean, he would have to put a policy around that where the farmers would sponsor them. Look, when he ran, he said he was going to get rid of criminals, and he is now going after anybody they can find because Stephen Miller set a quota, which is hard to make if you're just going after criminals. We have a story here on Long Island about a guy who ran a bagel store for 20 years in Port Washington, was deported. The entire community is in uproar, a community that voted for Donald Trump, right? So
Right.
he can't be getting rid of people who have been making America work. And whether it's in the farming industry, whether it's in the hospitality industry, whether it's in the service industry, they are here just like our, you know, grandparents and great-grandparents. They came to this country looking for a better life. There is no good process to bring people like that in here right now. And perhaps President Trump should be looking to try to revive some form of immigration reform that allows for farm workers to have a temporary status, that allows for people who are working in our service sector to have a status, rather than sending ICE raids to a farm where people are just working to harvest crops and make a living and get a better life for their children.
Is that what he was hinting at, Lauren, do you think? Some sort of, I mean, not comprehensive reform, but something smaller?
This is what he does, and this is how Trump's not ideological, and he's very willing to change on his own positions that he's promised. On the campaign trail, actually, to counter what Chris is saying, he didn't just promise to deport criminals. He promised to deport everyone, and that's why he had such a clear immigration policy, was he basically said, if you're here illegally, you have to leave, and the public was on his side. But as we've both said on your show, Connell, the implementation of this is going to be the tough part, and that's what we're seeing.
That's what he's getting hit with. The polling showed that. The Fox poll the other day that the president was not a fan of showed just that on immigration. Lauren, thank you. Chris as well. Got to move on here. The legal back and forth between the president